A former member of the Immigration and Refugee Board of Canada has alleged that since 2019, tens of thousands of refugee claimants have been approved by the IRC sight unseen based off of a written piece of paper. Typically, every refugee applicant needs to have an in-person adjudication so that a bureaucrat can figure out if the applicant is telling the truth, if they are who they say they are. But according to James Yousif, the author of this report from the Howe Institute and the former member of the Immigration and Refugee Board, he alleges that the, quote, file review system was used to exempt entire categories of claims, such as nationality and claim type, from the required in-person adjudication. Now, all of this was done, according to the Howe Institute, as a way to lower the backlog of refugee claims. The result, of course, was that not only did the backlog of claims actually continue to go up, but that the Immigration and Refugee Board of Canada was actually just rubber stamping tens of thousands of refugee applications without ever looking at who these people actually are. Joining me now to discuss this scandal is investigative journalist and the founder of the Bureau, Sam Cooper. Sam, thanks for joining me, and I just want to know right off the top, how was it possible that tens of thousands of refugee applicants have been accepted into this country sight unseen?
Well, Harrison, I don't think we would know anything about it unless this report from a former official with the Refugee Board and a policy director for many years, James Yousif. He's a lawyer. He came out and he has written this critique of this little-known program, and it's pretty complicated. But the first part of my answer is, look, this is a program that apparently the Refugee Board, according to this report, was under the gun around 2017. There was a review that included a deputy minister, the Privy Council Machinery of Government Office, which essentially is the office that runs Canada's government, was sort of looming over the Refugee Board because it was not handling the backlog of refugee claimants. You know, Harrison, as you and I and others have sort of that have looked into the system, probably have the idea for years. It's a pretty broken system. Canada's border controls are very lax. Canada is very welcoming to refugees, as we should be as a great country. But the system for vetting refugees had broken down. So in a nutshell, this report from James Yousif finds that the Refugee Board came up with a solution to deal with the backlog, and that was that they would accept claims on paper without any in-person questioning. And the rationale behind that is, of course, what they call an affirmative decision can just be made verbally. A person that comes from a country that, to simplify it here, basically has high security risks, also has let's call it a history of cracking down on dissidents or people that are enemies of authoritarian governments. Canada's refugee system said, if you come from one of those countries like Yemen, Iraq, Syria, we'll accept that you have a valid argument that you're a refugee. We won't even question you. That's it in a nutshell. So that's how it looks like, in an effort to preserve its own role, the Refugee Board came up with this solution. And the solution was no vetting. Very simply, it sounds wild and absurd. And so, at least 25,000 people have been let in, just by claiming on paper that, they come from this country and putting forward a narrative, very likely things like they are LGBTQ coming from Iraq or something like that. And so the adjudicator will see that in this system and boom, check mark, you're in.
Have you noticed that most of the food and snacks you buy at the grocery store leave you feeling tired, sluggish, or even sick? That's because most of the food in the grocery store is pumped full of chemicals, preservatives, and seed oils. That's why I've partnered with my friends over at Rancher's Chips. This small Canadian company has created a 100% seed oil-free beef tallow potato chip. These kettle-cooked chips are made the old-fashioned way with just 3 simple ingredients: potatoes, salt, and beef tallow. No seed oils, no gimmicks, just pure crunch in every bite. Eating a bag of Rancher's chips doesn't leave you feeling sick or tired. It's real food. So click the link in the description of this video or in the pinned comment and use the code at checkout Harrison10 to get 10% off your next order of Rancher's chips. My family loves Rancher's chips, and I know yours will too. Well, given that this whole thing was taking place using outdated policies and paper-based file review systems, it makes me wonder what other departments in the federal government are operating this way as well. This is remarkable that the Immigration and Refugee Board of Canada was relying on a paper-based trust system, essentially, as late as 2017 and onwards, to vet refugees. So, you in your reporting and in other reporting, there's allegations that there could be widespread fraud here taking place. Can you just walk us through how this paper-based file review process even worked, at least from what you have been able to find?
Yeah, and I'll drop in some data points from the author James Yousif, who makes powerful arguments, both economic and legal. So essentially, what he says is the IRB came up with this system where, as someone entering Canada, so that could include someone from Syria crossing in Roxham Road in Montreal, the notorious, border crossing where people just get let in. They walk across the border illegally and say, I'm a refugee. And so they will file a piece of paper with CBSA essentially, and it will say, I'm from X country. I have my family members with me. I'm in a hotel in Quebec or Ontario for the time being. I'm a refugee, and I'm just sort of filling in the blanks of how it works. They would write something like, father, mother, 2 children. Father is, a Christian in Iraq, feels like he's under the gun from Islamists or something like that. And, that paper goes in, it'll go into an adjudicator for the IRB. And under this new system, in the past, legally, there'd have to be a hearing. But remember, there's such a backlog of people rushing into Canada, very likely because people like Justin Trudeau said, come here, we're, diversity is our strength. And so people rushed in, they make that refugee claim, and a massive amount of people are in the log. The adjudicators can't go through it. And so this is kind of the whole point of the report. The IRB under the gun, possibly a much more, diligent and forceful machinery of government from the Privy Council is ready to take over the system. They come up with this fix, but it seems to be a fix for them. They're going to survive a review by moving, so many more sort of claims through the system. And what happens, this is the key to the report. It was meant to take down that backlog. There was about 20,000 backlog claims when this system is brought online in 2018. Now we have 300,000, Harrison. So what the author James Yousif has asserted in a sort of a brilliant economic argument is human smugglers around the world, possibly terror networks around the world, possibly transnational criminal networks from South Asia, India, have recognized we can use this system. Canada is a very weak mark. And so this is why the system has become even more jammed. And, if you are identified as one of these countries of high concern, you will be approved for this expedited system where you can just make the paper claim. So there's so much more to unpack, but what it looks like simply, look, James Yousif says of the countries on this expedited list, so some of them in my memory, Russia, Iraq, Syria, Yemen, Sudan, Yousif identified 13 terror networks are based in these countries that get a fast pass. And so that, I believe it speaks to the problems we have seen in Canada over the past few years that have become of increasing concern to people like FBI Director Kash Patel, President Donald Trump, saying that people from ISIS are getting into Canada on student visas or refugees and coming across the border in the US. We know this is happening, and it looks like this incredible loophole is a big part of the problem.
From my perspective, I just don't understand why it's such an issue to have a large backlog for refugee claims. You would think the more important thing to think about as a IRB bureaucrat is to ensure safety in the country and ensure safety in the country. Sure, there might be a backlog, but am I crazy for saying that the backlog doesn't really matter? Why would the backlog matter unless it seems more important for bureaucrats to reach, internal office targets?
Harrison, that's one of the powerful arguments of this paper by James Yousif. It seems that the IRB went to this paper system, throwing away the national security architecture of in-person interviews, simply because by having a positive decision, the adjudicator doesn't even have to put paper into the system. And when you put paper into the system, making a negative review. So remember, if you're an in-person interview and you pick apart someone's claim that, they are a dissident, or as I found, in my book, Willful Blindness, you had people coming from China saying they're an enemy of the Chinese Communist Party because they're a democracy activist. Meanwhile, Harrison, I found many cases where they're a high-level gangster traveling back and forth to China, right? So if you're an adjudicator, you can pick that apart. You can make the argument, but once you do that, you'll be exposed to another phalanx of lawyers or reviews. And so James Yousif's argument is, this is pure bureaucratic survival. To survive as the IRB, they said, we'll ram applications through, and we won't expose ourselves to this backlog and this vetting and checking system. It seems to be as simple as that in a way. So, my work is all about national security, and are there people on our soil, whether you're an Indian international student working for the Indian government, as we know now, to target people in the Sikh community, whether you're someone that came across Roxman Road in Montreal and you're an ISIS person hunting young ladies in Brampton, which we know has happened. This is my state of mind, national security. Quite evidently, it's not the state of the mind of the Canadian bureaucracy. I don't know if they even think in those terms.
It's remarkable, and the amount of danger that this could put us in potentially. The fact that there could be someone in the country that was given this approval, who is a serious danger to society and to the public, that was let in, is honestly frightening to think about. You have tied this scandal, because that's what it is, into the extortion crisis we're seeing in the Lower Mainland in British Columbia. Can you explain the connection you've made there? Because you just hinted at it there a little bit at the end of your last answer. But how do you make the connection between the two? Because I think that's really interesting, especially for people out in British Columbia.
Yeah. So I had started with some exclusive reporting on this extortion crisis. My government sources, who have access to the new BC Anti-Extortion Task Force, run out of Surrey, BC, where the mayor, Brenda Locke, has declared it a national emergency and asked for an anti-extortion czar. My sources there said, look, they are very clear that Indian international students have gamed the system. They've come in on student visas, and then recognizing that they won't, make it through Canada's legal immigration system, some of them make refugee claims in this system. Some of them simply go off the radar. And, from the start, they have come in with organized crime groups recognizing the fraud that Canada's border is, or rather the easily exploited, let's call it fraud ecosystem. These South Asian gangsters there's a massive market for forged documents, for work or for school entry. And these markets are sold to people immigrating from India. And this is a part of the system, how these people are exploited and then they become exploiters. So that's a major story. As you know, Harrison, we have homes being shot up in Brampton, Surrey, major crisis. But where I made the connection is James Yousif, in his report on how the system is being gamed, says that these international fraud networks, human smugglers, potential terror networks have recognized this paper vetting system is an easy target for Canada to be entered. So that as well, he identifies that in this paper vetting system, which is based on an adjudicator reviewing a document only, not examining a human being, it's open to fraud and forgery. So that's the connection I make to the crisis we have of Indian and international students coming in through organized crime fraud networks and gaming the system, sometimes through refugee claims, sometimes simply disappearing on student visas.
Sam Cooper, always insightful, always timely. Thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks, Harrison.
If you enjoyed that video and you want to see more coverage about the immigration system in Canada, be sure to like this video, share it with your networks, and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Thank you all for watching.